I used to think that the worst thing a mother could do was stop loving her child. That night, I learned there's something far worse, when she decides you don't deserve to exist at all. The sky was ink black, a storm waiting to happen. My mother's old sedan rattled down the empty road, the headlights slicing through fog. The clock on the dashboard blinked 12:04 a.m., a reminder that we'd been driving for hours with no destination. No reason, just anger keeping us in motion. Mom, please, I said quietly, my voice trembling. Can we just go home? We can talk in the morning. Linda's grip tightened on the steering wheel. The cigarette between her fingers burned down to the filter, glowing red against her face. Home? She snapped, her voice cracking like glass. You think you still have a home after everything you've done? I turned toward her, confused. What have I done? I've been working, saving up, Trying? She interrupted, letting out a bitter laugh. You try to help, but all you do is remind me how much I've failed. You should have been born to someone else, someone who could afford you. Her words hit harder than the cold wind blowing through the cracked window. I stared at her profile, the sharp cheekbones, the painted lips that had once kissed my forehead goodnight. Now they twisted into something hateful. You think I ruined your life? I whispered. She slammed her hand against the steering wheel. You did! You ruined everything, Rachel. Your father left because of you, and I had to give up everything for you. My job, my friends, my freedom. You're 26 and still clinging to me like a leech. Her voice echoed inside the car, bouncing between the windows until it felt like the air itself was against me. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I didn't ask to be here, Mom. I didn't ask you to. Enough! She shouted. Then, as if something inside her snapped, she slammed her foot on the brake. The car screeched to a halt on a stretch of deserted highway. The world outside was silent, except for the low hum of insects and the distant howl of wind. A broken streetlight flickered a few feet away, casting a sickly orange glow on the asphalt. Linda turned to me, eyes cold, almost unrecognizable. Get out, I blinked, unsure I heard right. What? You heard me, she said flatly. Get out of the car, Rachel. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline, for her to soften, to say she didn't mean it. But she just looked at me with the same disgust she'd had for years. Only this time there was no pretense of love left. Mom. It's midnight, I stammered. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore, she said, voice icy calm. You're an adult. Figure it out. My heartbeat roared in my ears. You can't just leave me here. Watch me. The door locks clicked open. The sound felt final. I sat frozen, staring at her. Then slowly, I reached for the handle. The night air hit me like a slap, cold, sharp, alive. I stepped out, clutching my small bag, the one with my phone, wallet, and a few clothes. Please, I whispered, leaning down to the window. Mom, don't do this. I'll leave tomorrow, I promise. Just not like this. She didn't look at me. Her hand rested on the gear shift, knuckles pale. Goodbye. Rachel, she said quietly. The engine growled. The tires kicked up gravel, and before I could move, the red taillights began to shrink into the distance. I chased after the car, barefoot on the cold asphalt, screaming her name until the sound tore my throat raw. But she never stopped. Her car disappeared around the bend, swallowed by darkness. For a long time, I just stood there, my breath turning into mist, the highway stretching endlessly in both directions. The silence felt heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. I looked down the road, hoping she'd turn back. She never did. That was the moment something inside me cracked, not loudly, but with a quiet, painful finality. I dropped my bag and wrapped my arms around myself, shivering. The night smelled like rain and gasoline. A single thought kept echoing in my head, sharp and merciless. I thought mothers protect their daughters. Mine left me to die. I started walking. The road was rough beneath my feet, each step a fight against exhaustion. My phone battery had died earlier during the argument. No signal, no lights. Just the endless hum of the wind. Every few minutes I'd turn around, half hoping to see headlights. But the road behind me stayed dark. Hours passed. My legs ached. My throat was dry. Once, I saw a pair of headlights approaching, and for a heartbeat, I thought it was her, coming back for me. But it was a truck, roaring past without slowing down. Eventually, my knees gave out. I sat by the roadside, hugging my bag to my chest. Tears blurred the world, and I didn't even try to stop them. I must have drifted in and out of consciousness, because the next thing I heard was a man's voice. Hey, you okay there? I blinked. A large truck had pulled over. The driver, a man in his 50s with a scruffy beard and kind eyes, stepped out, holding a flashlight. His name tag read Sam. "Were you walking out here all night?" he asked, astonished. I could barely nod. My mom left." His face softened. "Well, that's not right. Come on, kid. Let's get you somewhere safe." He helped me climb into the cab, handed me a bottle of water, and turned the heat up. The warmth hit my skin, and for the first time in hours, I felt human again. Sam drove me to a gas station a few miles away. He offered to call the police, but I refused. I didn't want to explain. I didn't want to be pitied. As he left, he pressed a few dollars into my hand. "Get yourself something warm to eat," he said. When the door closed and the hum of the engine faded, I sat on the curb, watching dawn bleed into the sky. The world felt quiet, empty but alive. I looked down at my trembling hands, wiped my tears, and whispered to myself, "I'll never be that helpless again." And I meant it. The women's shelter smelled faintly of bleach and instant coffee, the scent of survival. When I walked in that morning, I wasn't thinking about pride or shame. I just wanted a door that locked and a blanket that didn't smell like rain. The receptionist, a tired woman with kind eyes named Martha, took one look at me, my wet clothes, trembling hands, and swollen eyes, and said softly, "You can stay a few nights. No questions tonight." Those words saved me. She gave me a small bed in a shared room with 3 other women. One of them, an older lady named June, offered me a granola bar. Another one just nodded without speaking, her eyes hollow but understanding. There was an unspoken language in that room, the kind that only women who've lost everything seem to share. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling fan turning lazily above me. The blanket was thin, but it was warm. My body was safe, but my mind kept replaying the same scene, the taillights fading into the dark, my mother's voice saying, "You're not my problem anymore." I pressed my hand to my chest, as if I could quiet the echo, but the words had carved themselves into my bones. Days passed in a blur of exhaustion and adjustment. Mornings began with coffee that tasted like cardboard and quiet chatter in the common room. Some women left early for work, others just stared out the window, waiting for something. Maybe a miracle, maybe a reason. I didn't talk much. I didn't have a story I was ready to share, but I listened. One woman talked about escaping a violent husband. Another had lost her job and her home in the same week. Everyone had a version of starting over. I didn't know yet what mine would look like, only that I had to find it. Martha helped me apply for a small cleaning job at a nearby office building. It wasn't much. 3 nights a week, minimum wage, cleaning floors and emptying trash cans after everyone else had gone home. But the first time I held that paycheck, my hands shook. It wasn't just money. It was proof that I was still here. Sometimes, when I walked the empty office halls, I'd catch my reflection in the glass, tired eyes, hair tied back, uniform too big, and I'd whisper, "Keep going." One night, I found an old notebook in the shelter's donation box. The cover was torn, pages yellowed at the edges. Still, I took it. I began writing inside it every night before bed. Not about pain. Not about the past, but about the future. I'll build something that no one can take away. That was the first line I wrote. Underneath it, I started listing goals. Find stable work. Get my own place. Save enough for classes. Never depend on anyone again. It was nothing fancy. Just pen and paper, but it gave me direction when everything else felt like fog. Sometimes, though the past crept back in, I'd be scrubbing a sink or wiping down a desk, and suddenly I'd remember being 12. sitting on the front porch with a melted birthday cake on my lap. Mom had forgotten again. She came home late, smelling of perfume and cigarettes, muttering something about being too busy. When I asked if we could have just one slice together, she'd sighed and said, "You always want too much." Rachel, that sentence never left me, or the time she invited my cousin Emily over for dinner. Emily, the golden child with perfect grades and perfect posture. Mom spent the whole night praising her, talking about how that's how a daughter should be. I was 15 then. I remember sitting there pretending to smile, pretending it didn't matter. But it did. The pattern had started long before that night on the highway. I just hadn't wanted to believe my own mother could hate the sight of me. At the shelter, I learned small lessons about resilience. June, the older woman, taught me how to stretch $10 worth of groceries into a week of meals. Another woman, Sierra, showed me where to find cheap work shoes that didn't hurt your feet. In their company, I stopped feeling invisible. We laughed sometimes, real laughter. Once, when the heater broke and everyone huddled together under blankets, June joked, "Guess we're one electric bill away from being roommates for life." It made me laugh until I cried. I realized then that survival doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just hums quietly while you learn to stand again. One evening, after cleaning, I walked home under the city lights. The air smelled like rain again, but this time it didn't scare me. I stopped at a diner, ordered a cup of coffee I couldn't really afford, and sat by the window. Outside, cars sped by, headlights stretching like white ribbons down the street. For a moment, I imagined that same highway where my mother had left me. It no longer looked like a place of endings. It looked like a place I'd walked away from. When I returned to the shelter that night, I opened my notebook again. I added a new line beneath my goals. One day, she'll see me. Not as her mistake, but as the woman she couldn't destroy. I didn't know how or when that would happen. But I knew it would. As I turned off the light, the shelter was quiet, just the sound of distant traffic and someone's soft snoring across the room. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel afraid of the dark. I just felt ready. Opportunity doesn't knock. Sometimes it just slips quietly through a side door when no one's looking. For me, that door was a help-wanted notice taped to a cafe window. Startup assistant needed, organizational skills required. Apply in person. At that point, I was still cleaning offices and living in the shelter, saving every dollar I could. My hands were cracked from cleaning supplies, my shoes worn through at the soles. But something in me whispered, "Try." The office was small, just a converted warehouse with glass partitions and mismatched chairs. People in hoodies typed furiously, wires and coffee cups everywhere. A young receptionist looked up. "Are you here for the assistant position?" she asked. I nodded, clutching the folded ad in my hand. Minutes later, a tall man in his 50s appeared, gray hair, calm eyes, and the kind of posture that spoke of quiet authority. Mr. Grant. He didn't look at my clothes or my shoes. He looked directly at me. "Tell me," he said, "why do you want to work here?" I didn't have the perfect answer. I just told the truth, because I work hard, because I learn fast, and because I need a chance. He studied me for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Fair enough. Let's see what you can do." The first few weeks were chaos. The company was young, 5 employees trying to build something bigger than themselves. My job was to organize files, sort invoices, keep track of client emails, and fix anything that broke. I knew nothing about tech, but I knew how to make order out of mess. So I did. I created labeled folders, color-coded schedules, and daily summaries. I learned the company's project management software in one night just by watching YouTube tutorials. When I noticed a few accounting mistakes in their reports, I quietly corrected them and left a note explaining why. By the end of my first month, Mr. Grant called me into his office. "Rachel," he said, leaning back in his chair, "you've caught more errors in 4 weeks than most people do in a year." I smiled nervously. "Old habits? I'm used to fixing things," he chuckled. Keep that up, and you'll be running this place someday. It was the first time in years someone had said something believing about me. Every night after work, I stayed behind, pretending to finish up paperwork. In reality, I was teaching myself how the software worked, what the coders were doing, why the business reports looked the way they did. The office was quiet after hours, just the hum of computers and the city lights flickering through the blinds. At first, I felt foolish. I didn't even know how to run a line of code. But I remembered something Mr. Grant had said during a team meeting. Discomfort is the tuition you pay for growth, so I paid it gladly. I borrowed library books on business basics and coding. I wrote down every unfamiliar term and looked it up later. My old notebook, the one I'd found at the shelter, was now filled with new goals. Learn one new skill every week. Never walk out of work without understanding something new. Become irreplaceable. Some nights I went home so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. But for the first time, my exhaustion felt meaningful. One evening, while I was sorting through old invoices, Mr. Grant walked by and saw me still at my desk. "You're here late again," he said. "I'm just trying to understand how you calculate client renewals," I admitted. "If I can figure out the logic, I can help automate part of it." He raised an eyebrow. "You're not required to do that." "I know," I said, shrugging. "But I like knowing how things work." He paused, studying me again. The same look he'd given me during my interview. Then he smiled. "You've got the fire most people lose in comfort." That sentence stayed with me for weeks. It wasn't about flattery. It was recognition. Someone finally saw me not as a burden, not as a mistake, but as someone who could. By the third month, I was earning more money. Not much, but enough to start dreaming beyond the shelter. I found a small apartment near the office, one room, creaky floors, walls thin enough to hear the neighbor's TV, but it was mine. The day I signed the lease, I sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by cardboard boxes, eating instant noodles, and crying quietly. Not because I was sad, but because the silence no longer scared me. I remembered that freezing highway and realized I'd kept my promise to myself. I wasn't helpless anymore. As the weeks passed, I became part of the team. When a client called in a panic over a missing file, I already had backups organized. When the developers struggled with scheduling, I offered a simple spreadsheet that saved hours. Mr. Grant started including me in meetings, first as a note-taker, then as a voice. Once, when a client presentation crashed, I managed to restore the files minutes before the meeting began. Afterward, Mr. Grant clapped me on the shoulder. "Remind me to stop underestimating you," he said. I laughed. "Please don't stop." "It keeps me motivated," he grinned. "Fair enough." At night, I'd still catch glimpses of my reflection. This time not in office glass, but in the mirror of my small apartment. I saw someone tired but alive, bruised but unbroken. Sometimes I thought about my mother. Where she was, what she was doing. Then I'd shake the thought away. I wasn't ready to look back yet. My focus was forward, on becoming the woman my past said I couldn't be. One Saturday morning, I sat by the window of my apartment with coffee and my old notebook. The pages were wrinkled, ink smudged from long nights of writing. On the first page, I'd once written, "I'll build something that no one can take away." Now, beneath it, I added a new line. "And I'll never let fear drive me off the road again." I closed the notebook and smiled to myself. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was learning how to win. I used to think success would feel like revenge, loud, dazzling, and full of applause. But standing in the glass office of Artech Solutions, watching my team work late under soft fluorescent lights, I realized real success was quiet. It didn't scream. It glowed. 2 years. That's all it took to transform from a woman sleeping on a cot in a shelter to the founder of a company making headlines in the logistics world. And yet every time I looked in the mirror, I still saw that girl on the highway, scared, freezing, and unwanted. When Mr. Grant and I started Artech Solutions, We had nothing but an idea scribbled on a napkin, an AI system that could optimize transport routes for small logistics firms. It sounded impossible at the time. We worked from his garage with second-hand computers and instant coffee. But somehow, it clicked. Grant became more than a mentor. He was the first person who ever looked at me and saw potential instead of pity. "You've got fire, Rachel," he used to say. "Most people only find it when life gets too comfortable. You found it when life threw you to the curb." I laughed when he said that once, literally, because life had thrown me to the curb. A dark highway, midnight, and a mother who decided I wasn't worth keeping. Now I walked through the bright, buzzing halls of our rented office space downtown. The sound of keyboards tapping and phones ringing filled the air. My name, Rachel Morgan, founder and CEO, gleamed on the glass door. My team respected me, but they didn't know my story. They didn't know that every time I approved a new hire or signed a contract, I thought of Linda, my mother, and wondered if she'd ever imagined the girl she left behind was now employing 50 people. During investor meetings, I wore confidence like armor. I'd learned that silence can be more powerful than speeches. When others bragged about degrees and family businesses, I simply presented results, charts, data, proof that I didn't need anyone's name to stand tall. One Friday night, after everyone had gone home, I stayed behind to finish the quarterly report. The office was dim except for the glow of my laptop. Rain tapped against the windows. As I scrolled through the financials, I realized we'd landed 3 major clients this quarter, companies that, 2 years ago, wouldn't have even taken my call. For a long moment, I just sat there letting it sink in. I thought about the shelter, the cracked mirror above my bed, the stale smell of soup. The way I used to whisper promises to myself, "I'll build something no one can take away," and now I had. But success has a strange way of bringing the past closer instead of pushing it away. That night, driving home, I took a different route. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel as I turned onto that highway, the one where it all began. The air felt heavy, the road still lonely, the same stretch of cracked asphalt, the same flickering streetlight. I parked the car on the shoulder and got out. The wind was cold, carrying the faint scent of rain. For a moment, I just stood there, looking around, trying to find the exact spot where my mother's taillights had disappeared into the darkness. It had been 2 years, but I could still hear her voice echoing in my head. "Get out. You're not my problem anymore." Back then, those words broke me. Now, they built me. I reached into my coat pocket and took out a single red rose. I'd bought it earlier without really knowing why. Maybe I wanted to mark this place, to leave something behind that wasn't pain. Kneeling on the damp ground, I placed the rose near the edge of the road. "This isn't forgiveness," I whispered. "It's closure." My voice trembled, but not from sadness, from release. I stood up and looked at the horizon. The faintest glow of dawn began to rise, painting the clouds in pale orange, and for the first time in years I didn't feel haunted. I felt free. Back in the car, I checked my phone, an unread message from Grant. "Board meeting next week. Potential investor from New York interested. Proud of you, kid." I smiled. Kid. No one had called me that in years. As I started the engine, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My hair was tied back neatly, my eyes steady, confident. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I murmured, repeating the words I'd written months ago in my old notebook. I was learning how to win. The headlights lit up the dark road ahead. The rose, behind me, swayed softly in the wind, a symbol of what I'd left behind. And I drove forward toward the life I'd built with my own hands, leaving the ghost of the highway and the woman who abandoned me in the rearview mirror forever. When the reporter called, I almost said no. I wasn't used to attention. I'd built my company in the shadows, working late, avoiding noise. But she sounded so genuinely excited. You're one of the youngest female founders in the city to cross 10 million in annual revenue, she said. People need to hear stories like yours. I hesitated, then agreed to the interview. I told myself it was good for the company, good publicity, good networking. What I didn't realize was that it would reopen a door I thought had been sealed forever. The article came out a week later in the Haven City Times. The headline stretched across the top of the business section. Young entrepreneur builds empire from scratch. Our-Tech's rise under Rachel Morgan. My photo was beside it. Me in a navy blazer, smiling awkwardly in front of our office. The story described how I'd started from nothing, how I'd turned hardship into innovation. I'd shared little about my past, only that I'd faced family struggles and rebuilt my life through work and discipline. The comments online poured in fast. Inspiring story. Proof that women can make it on their own. Would love to work for her someday. I smiled at my phone, heart swelling. Not because of the praise, but because it was mine. Every word, every achievement, every late night had led to this. But across town, someone else was reading the same article. Someone who once told me I'd never be anything. Linda's POV, as seen through narration and Rachel's awareness. Later. Linda sat at the kitchen table of her small rented apartment, her second divorce papers still unsigned. She'd been scrolling job listings on her cracked tablet when the newspaper headline caught her eye. Our-Tech Solutions, she murmured. That sounds familiar. She squinted at the picture of the woman in the navy blazer. The name printed below it froze her. Rachel Morgan. Her laugh was bitter and small. No, she said out loud. It can't be her. My Rachel couldn't even hold a job. But the resemblance, those sharp eyes, that chin, she knew it instantly. For a moment, her chest tightened. Then she pushed the thought away. Probably just someone with the same name, she muttered, closing the page. Yet the image stayed in her mind all night. Meanwhile, I was in the middle of another hiring round at Our-Tech. The company was expanding fast. We needed new coordinators, analysts, developers. The HR team worked overtime reviewing applications. Rachel, said Mia, our HR manager, walking into my office one afternoon. We've got some strong candidates for the admin role. One of them's named, let's see. She flipped through her file. Linda Cooper. She has years of office experience. Looks like she managed schedules and reports at a few small firms. The name hit me like a lightning strike. Linda. Cooper. My pulse jumped. I tried to steady my expression. Can you repeat that? I asked quietly. Mia looked up. Linda Cooper. You okay? I nodded slowly, but my mind wasn't. My birth name was Rachel Taylor. Linda Taylor had been my mother before she remarried twice, once becoming Linda Carson, then later Linda Cooper. My throat felt dry. Yeah, I said finally. Send her resume to me, please. I'd like to, personally review it. When Mia left, I just sat there staring at the wall. I hadn't heard my mother's name spoken in years. It sounded strange, almost fictional, like a character from a story I used to read. I thought about that night again. The highway, the headlights fading, the silence. Could it really be her? I opened the digital resume file Mia sent over. The moment I saw the date of birth, I knew. Linda Cooper, 52. Formerly Linda Taylor. It was her. Her employment history painted a picture I didn't need to read between the lines to understand. Short-term jobs, gaps between positions, some in customer service, one in retail. Her last listed job had ended 6 months ago. The address at the bottom was in the same city. She was here. My heart pounded. The air in my office suddenly felt heavier. For a while, I just stared at the screen. Memories flickered like ghosts. Her yelling in the car, her laughter when I cried, her face as she told me to get out. Part of me wanted to delete the file. to pretend I'd never seen it. But another part, the one that had built this company, that had walked miles through freezing air that night, wanted to see her, wanted her to see me. Mia knocked gently on my door again. So, should I schedule interviews for the top 3 candidates? I looked up, my voice steady but soft. Yes, include Linda Cooper on the list. Got it. As the door closed, I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. The irony was suffocating. 2 years ago, I was begging her for a ride home. Now she was unknowingly asking me for a job. I picked up the newspaper still lying on my desk, the same one that had started it all. My photo stared back at me, smiling under the headline, "Young Entrepreneur Builds Empire from Scratch." I ran my fingers over the printed letters, my voice barely a whisper. From scratch, and without you. For the first time, I wasn't sure whether I wanted revenge or simply understanding. But one thing was certain. The past had finally found its way back to me, and this time, I wasn't the helpless girl on the highway. I was the woman sitting behind the desk, and she was the one coming to knock on my door. I had conducted hundreds of interviews before. Some were routine, others strategic. But this one felt like a storm I had been walking toward for years. The HR room was quiet that morning. A soft hum from the air conditioner, the faint scent of coffee from the break room. Everything was still, until I saw her name on the schedule. Linda Cooper, 10:30 a.m. I'd barely slept the night before. My thoughts kept circling the same question. What will I say when I finally see her? Would I tremble? Would I cry? Would I shout? Instead, when morning came, I felt strangely calm. Too calm. Almost unnervingly so. Like the silence right before thunder. At 10:28, a knock sounded on my office door. Mia peeked in. "Your last candidate's here," she said cheerfully. "Linda Cooper. Should I send her in?" My heart slowed, not quickened. "Yes," I said evenly. "Send her in." I stood from my chair, adjusting my blazer. My reflection in the glass wall looked composed. Hair pinned back, makeup soft but precise. Not a trace of that 26-year-old girl trembling on the side of the road. The door opened. She stepped inside. I recognized her instantly. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with gray, curled slightly at the ends. The same green eyes, though dulled with exhaustion. She wore a navy skirt and a cheap white blouse, the kind you buy secondhand when you're trying to look professional. She smiled, politely, uncertainly. "Good morning," she said, extending her hand. "Linda Cooper," I took it. For a moment her hand trembled in mine. She didn't know. Not yet. "Please have a seat," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "I'm Rachel Morgan, CEO of Artech Solutions." Her lips parted slightly, not in recognition, but surprise. "Oh, I didn't expect to meet the CEO directly." "We like to stay involved," I replied smoothly, sitting down. "It's part of our culture." I opened her resume, pretending to read. "So, Linda," I began, "tell me a little about your experience." She brightened, eager to please. "Of course, I've worked in administrative positions for over 20 years. Scheduling, client calls, office management. I'm very organized and dependable." Her voice was almost the same, slightly sharp, overly confident. I could hear the old rhythms of her authority. "And you mentioned in your cover letter," I said, glancing up, "that you raised a daughter on your own?" Her smile softened. "Yes. It wasn't easy, but I did the best I could. She's grown now. Lives her own life, I suppose." She gave a rehearsed little laugh. "You know how kids are." My throat tightened, but I kept my expression unreadable. "Must have been difficult," I said softly. "Raising her alone." Linda nodded, her tone almost proud. "Oh, absolutely. She was always dramatic, emotional. I had to be the strong one." I leaned back in my chair, tilting my head slightly. Yes, I murmured. I remember those skills, especially the one where you left me on the highway. Silence. Her smile froze, then fell away entirely. Her face drained of color as the words registered. What? What did you just say? I didn't blink. You heard me. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. Rachel? She whispered. I didn't answer. I just held her gaze. Rachel, she said again, her voice cracking. I didn't recognize you. You've changed so much. So have you, I said coolly. Though some things don't seem to change at all. She looked down, her hands shaking. You have to understand. I understand perfectly, I interrupted. My tone was low, controlled. You wanted me gone. And now you're sitting here, asking me for a job. Tears welled in her eyes. I was angry that night. I didn't mean, I thought you'd follow. Follow? My voice stayed calm, but sharper now. You drove off, Mother. You left me standing there at midnight in the freezing cold, miles from anywhere. That's not anger. That's cruelty. She buried her face in her hands. I've regretted it every day since. No, I said quietly. You ignored it every day since. There's a difference. She looked up, eyes red, mascara running. You have every right to hate me. I know I failed you. But please, Rachel, I need this job. I have nothing left. Her desperation hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, I saw the woman who once towered over me. And then, beneath her cracked voice and trembling hands, I saw something else. A stranger. I took a slow breath. Do you know what I remember most about that night? She said nothing. The sound of your car. The headlights fading. I stood there for hours before a truck driver stopped. I thought I'd freeze before morning. Her lip quivered. Rachel, I held up a hand. You don't need to explain. Not anymore. The room was quiet again. Only the faint hum of the air conditioner filled the space. You said once I ruined your life, I said, my voice soft but steady. Maybe you were right. Maybe I did. But I built a new one. And it doesn't need you in it. She flinched as if struck. I stood. This interview is over. HR will contact you about the outcome. Rachel, please, she whispered. Just, please, don't turn me away. I'll do anything. I paused by the door, my hand on the frame. I spent years doing anything I could to survive, I said. Now I just do what's right for me. She looked up at me, tears pooling. You've become so cold. I met her gaze, calm and unflinching. No, Mother. I've become free. She sat there, shoulders shaking as I walked back to my desk. I picked up her resume, folded it neatly and placed it in the rejection pile. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel vindicated either, just still, like a storm that had finally passed. As I looked out the window at the city skyline, I smiled, not out of cruelty, but closure. For once, I didn't need her to understand. Her chapter in my life had ended, and this time I was the one who walked away. I didn't plan to offer her the job. When I walked out of that interview, every rational part of me wanted to end it there, to let the past stay buried under that same cold highway asphalt. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her face when she realized who I was, not just the shock, but the fear. And something in me whispered, let her live with it. Not through punishment, but through proximity. Let her see day after day what she left behind. The next morning, I sent a short message to HR. Subject, admin position, hire proceed with offering the role to Linda Cooper at entry-level pay. RM. When Mia stopped by to confirm, she looked surprised. Are you sure? She didn't seem like our top candidate. I nodded. I'm sure. Give her a 3-month trial period. Mia smiled, shrugging. If you say so, boss. Boss. That word still felt strange sometimes, but now it carried a different weight. Linda started work the following Monday. I saw her arrive early, just as I'd once done years ago when I was desperate for a chance. She wore the same navy skirt from the interview, now ironed to near perfection, and carried a plain black handbag. She didn't see me as I passed the lobby, but I saw her and standing beside the reception desk, clutching her orientation packet like it was a lifeline. When Mia introduced her to the team, the staff greeted her politely, not knowing our history. "This is Linda Cooper. Joining us as admin support," Mia said. "She'll be helping with schedules, filing, and general operations." Linda smiled stiffly. "Thank you. I'm grateful for the opportunity." Our eyes met across the room. Just for a second. She looked away first. Over the next few days, I observed her from a distance. She was diligent, painfully so. Always the first to arrive, the last to leave. She refilled the coffee machine, double-checked inventory, helped junior staff with spreadsheets. No one treated her badly. In fact, they liked her. But they didn't see her. She was invisible in the way assistants often are, and for the first time in her life, she had no power. Everyone else, from interns to senior managers, treated me with the kind of respect she once demanded. "Good morning, ma'am." "Morning, boss." "Rachel, we've finalized the client proposal." I would nod, calm and professional, while Linda sat in the corner office typing minutes. Each ma'am that reached her ears made her shoulders tighten just slightly. She never looked at me directly unless she had to. One afternoon, I caught her in the break room wiping the counter with slow, careful motions. She didn't notice me at first. Her hands trembled faintly. I almost said something, asked if she was all right, but stopped myself. Instead, I walked to the coffee machine, poured a cup, and said quietly, "You're doing good work, Mrs. Cooper." She froze. Then, softly, she said, "Thank you." Ms. Morgan, no emotion, no eye contact. Just the mechanical civility of survival. That night, I sat alone in my office long after everyone had left. The lights from the city glimmered through the glass walls. This wasn't how I imagined victory. It didn't burn. It didn't thrill. It just existed. A quiet echo of something long finished. A week later, during lunch, I passed by the staff dining area. The room was full. Laughter, clinking utensils, the low hum of conversation. Linda sat at a small table near the corner, eating a sandwich from a paper napkin. Across from her, a young employee named Clara smiled brightly. "Mrs. Cooper, you've been here a few weeks now. Did you know the boss before? You two seem familiar." I stopped just outside the doorway. Linda stiffened, then forced a small laugh. "Oh no," she said quickly. "Just professional respect. She's remarkable, isn't she?" Clara nodded. "She really is." "I've never seen someone so focused." Linda smiled again, tight, brittle, then looked down at her sandwich as the conversation shifted. For a second, our eyes met through the glass panel. She must have felt me watching. I turned away before she could speak. That evening, as I was leaving, I saw her again, in the parking lot, standing beside her old car. She looked up at the sky like she was searching for something. Maybe peace. Maybe forgiveness. I almost walked over. Almost. But something inside whispered, not yet. She needed to live this. To feel what it was like to exist under someone else's control, the way she once demanded it from me. As I drove out, headlights cutting through the dusk, the memory of that midnight highway flickered in my mind. Back then, I'd stood alone in the dark, shaking and afraid. Now, I was the one behind the wheel, calm, steady, unstoppable, and yet, my chest ached in ways I couldn't name. Back home, I opened my old notebook, the one I'd written in at the shelter years ago. On the last page, beneath faded ink and tear marks, I wrote a single new line. Maybe revenge isn't fire. Maybe it's the silence after you've won. Then I closed it, placed it back on the shelf, and turned off the light. For the first time in years, I didn't dream about the highway. Only silence and peace. The office was quiet that evening, the kind of silence that settles after everyone's gone home but leaves behind echoes of laughter and printer hums. I sat in my glass office, watching Linda through the transparent wall. She was typing slowly, squinting at the screen, her fingers trembling slightly. The confident woman who once strutted around in sharp heels and sharper words was now fumbling to finish a data entry sheet. 2 months into her employment, the cracks in her mask had started to show. She came in early, stayed late, smiled too hard when others passed by. The younger staff, polite but oblivious, often corrected her mistakes. I caught the wince on her face every time they did. And I remembered that same wince on mine when she'd call me useless for spilling coffee on the kitchen counter, or ungrateful for asking to stay home from school. Now the roles had reversed. One morning, during a staff meeting, Linda accidentally sent the wrong report to a client. A small mistake, but in our world, details mattered. When I mentioned it briefly in front of the team, her face froze. "I'm sorry, Ms. Taylor," she said quickly, voice breaking. "Fix it before lunch," I replied evenly. Her eyes flickered up at me, searching for something. Recognition? Pity? Maybe forgiveness. But I gave her nothing. That afternoon, I overheard two employees whispering in the break room. "She's the new admin, right?" "Mrs. Cooper?" one asked. "Yeah, she seems nervous all the time. Probably new to office work." Linda passed by them, tray in hand, pretending not to hear. Her fingers trembled and the coffee nearly spilled. For a moment, I wanted to step in, to tell them to stop whispering, to give her some dignity. But I didn't, I just watched, because somewhere deep inside, that same child still remembered crying on a cold highway, begging not to be left alone. That evening, after everyone left, Linda knocked softly on my office door. "Ms. Taylor?" I looked up. "Yes?" She hesitated, clutching her handbag. Could I talk to you for a minute?" I nodded. She stepped in and closed the door behind her. Her voice was fragile, her hands shaking as she spoke. "I wanted to apologize," she began, "for the mistakes at work and for other things." I didn't speak. She took a deep breath. "I made mistakes as a mother," she whispered. I wasn't patient. I wasn't kind. I was scared of bills, of loneliness, of failing again. But that's no excuse for what I did to you. Her eyes glistened, and for the first time, she didn't look defensive or proud, just broken. "I see you now," she said softly. "What you've become. And I'm proud. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that." For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the air conditioner. I studied her face, the wrinkles that hadn't been there before, the tired eyes, the gray in her hair. This was the same woman who once screamed at me for dreaming too big. Now she was standing before me, waiting for mercy, and yet I couldn't speak, because no amount of success had prepared me for this moment. That night, I couldn't sleep. Her words echoed in my mind, circling like ghosts. I was scared. I remembered her shouting at me when the rent was due. I remembered her silence when I asked for love. But I also remembered the fear in her eyes the day she left, the kind of fear that consumes people from the inside out. Maybe she wasn't just cruel. Maybe she was running from her own failures. The next morning, I walked past her desk. She looked up, startled, expecting criticism. Instead, I simply said, "Good morning, Mrs. Cooper." Her lips parted slightly, confused. Then she nodded. "Good morning, Ms. Taylor." I walked away before she could say more. That night, in my apartment, I poured myself a glass of wine and stared at the city lights outside my window. For years, I whispered to myself. I begged for her love. Now she's begging for mercy. It should have felt like victory. It didn't. Success had given me power, but it hadn't erased the ache. Revenge had given me silence, but not peace. I closed my eyes, realizing something I hadn't before. Maybe justice wasn't about seeing others fall. Maybe it was about standing tall, finally free from needing their apology. And somewhere deep down, I knew. Forgiveness wasn't weakness. But I wasn't ready yet, not tonight. The email from HR came just after lunch. Subject: Performance Review. Linda Cooper. I opened it slowly, even though I already knew what it would say. Frequent errors in filing reports. Missed deadlines. Difficulty adapting to digital systems. It ended with a polite question. Would you like us to initiate termination? I stared at the screen for a long time, the words blurring together. For weeks, I'd been pretending this moment wouldn't come. Pretending she'd somehow find her rhythm, prove she could stand on her own. But deep down, I knew the truth. The woman sitting outside my office wasn't the mother who'd once abandoned me. She was a shadow of her, still lost in the same maze of fear and pride, and somehow, she was still holding me there with her. That evening, everyone had gone home except me. The city lights flickered outside, painting the office walls in gold and gray. I packed my laptop and keys, but instead of heading to the parking lot, I started driving. No destination in mind. The road was quiet, the air heavy with rain. Without realizing it, I ended up back there. The same stretch of highway where my life had once split in two. One version of me left to die, the other forced to survive. I parked by the shoulder and stepped out. The wind was cold, sharp. The smell of asphalt and wet grass filled the air. Headlights from passing cars flashed across my face, just like that night years ago. I walked slowly along the edge, each step echoing like a heartbeat. Inner monologue. If I keep her, she'll keep haunting me. If I let her go, maybe I'll finally be free. I crouched down, my fingers brushing the rough gravel. The same place where I once cried myself to sleep, waiting for someone who never came back. I thought about how far I'd come since then. The company, the success, the power. But standing there, I realized none of it had erased the feeling of being left behind. Maybe closure wasn't something you earned. Maybe it was something you decided to give yourself. The next morning, I called HR. Send her to my office at noon, I said quietly. When Linda walked in, she looked exhausted. Her blouse was neatly pressed, but her hands trembled as she clutched a notepad. "Ms. Taylor," she said softly, "I know I've been struggling, but I'm learning. I promise I'll do better." Her voice cracked halfway through, and I could see the fear in her eyes. Not just fear of losing a job, but fear of losing whatever small connection still tethered us. I gestured for her to sit. She did slowly, like she was stepping into a courtroom. I reached into my drawer and slid an envelope across the desk. Inside was her final paycheck already signed. Her eyes widened. "You're letting me go?" I nodded once. "Effective today." She blinked rapidly as if trying to process the words. "I need this job, Rachel. I mean, Ms. Taylor, please, I can fix this." Her voice trembled. "I can do better." I kept my tone calm, measured, the same way she once sounded when telling me I wasn't enough. "You said I wasn't your problem?" I said quietly. "Now you're not mine." Silence. For a long time, neither of us moved. Then she covered her face with her hands and began to cry. Deep, heavy sobs that filled the room. I didn't reach out. I didn't comfort her, not because I hated her, but because I'd finally learned I didn't need to. When she finally stood, she looked smaller somehow, defeated. She clutched the envelope to her chest and whispered, "I'm sorry." "For everything." I met her eyes, steady and calm. "I know," she hesitated, then turned and walked out, slowly, quietly, like someone leaving a church after confession. The door closed behind her with a soft click. For a moment, I just sat there staring at the space she'd occupied. The faint scent of her perfume still lingered. The same one she used to wear when I was little. I let out a breath I didn't. No, I'd been holding. I thought I'd feel triumphant, powerful, vindicated. But instead I felt light, empty in a good way. Maybe that's what real freedom feels like. Not fireworks or applause, but silence. That night, I drove home through the city lights. When I passed the highway again, I didn't stop this time. I didn't need to. The past wasn't chasing me anymore. As I reached the top of the hill, I rolled down the window and let the wind rush in. It tangled my hair, cold and wild, but it made me feel alive. I whispered to myself, the words almost carried away by the wind. I didn't need revenge anymore. I needed peace, and for the first time in years, I finally had it. The ballroom shimmered with soft gold light, the kind that made everything look kinder than it really was. Rows of chairs filled the space. Young women, middle-aged mothers, tired faces carrying hope like a small flame. I stood behind the podium, fingers brushing the edge of my note cards even though I didn't need them. The banner behind me read, "Women Who Build Voices of Resilience, 6 months." That's how long it had been since I last saw her, since that quiet goodbye in my office. And somehow, in those 6 months, the silence had healed more than the years of noise ever did. When the host introduced me, polite applause filled the room. I smiled, not the rehearsed one for press photos, but the small, honest one that came when I realized I'd made it here by my own strength. I adjusted the mic. "Good evening, everyone." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. When people talk about success, they like to start with numbers, revenue, growth, expansion. But I think the real story always begins in the dark, in the moments no one sees. Dozens of faces watched me, waiting. I took a breath. "I didn't come from privilege," I said. "I came from a place most people don't talk about. From being told I wasn't enough, that I'd ruin everything I touched. But life has a strange way of teaching you that sometimes family breaks you to show you your own strength." A quiet murmur rippled through the crowd. Some nodded. Others dabbed at their eyes. "I used to think survival meant proving them wrong," I continued. "Now I know it means building something that no one can take away. Not money, not approval, not even love. Something that's yours completely." I looked down for a moment, gathering myself. So if you're sitting here thinking you're too broken, too far gone, or too small to matter, you're not. You're just not done yet. The applause came slowly, then all at once, rising like a wave. After the event, people lined up to shake my hand, take photos, share their stories. Some said I'd inspired them. Others whispered that they'd been where I was once. I smiled and listened, grateful but a little dazed. By the time I got to my car, the night air felt cool against my skin. The city lights glittered below the hill like constellations trapped in glass. I sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle. That's when my phone buzzed. A single message lit up the screen. From Linda Cooper. "I'm proud of you." I stared at the words. Not long. Just enough to feel their weight. There was no anger, no ache. Just a soft, distant understanding, like hearing an echo from a life I'd already outgrown. I deleted the message quietly. Not out of bitterness, but because I didn't need it anymore. On the drive home, I took the long route, the one that wound past the old highway. The night sky stretched wide and endless. Stars scattered like broken promises and tiny hopes. When I reached the familiar stretch of road, I slowed down. The same flickering streetlight still stood there, stubborn and buzzing. I rolled down the window. The air smelled of rain and gravel, exactly like that night years ago. Only this time, I wasn't crying. I wasn't cold, and I wasn't waiting for anyone to come back. Voiceover tone. That night she left me. I thought my life ended. The wind moved through the car, catching my hair. Soft against my face, I was wrong. I smiled. Small, real, free. That was the night it began. The headlights cut through the dark. The highway stretching endlessly ahead. Not a place of loss anymore, but of beginnings. And as the stars shimmered above, I pressed my foot on the gas, driving forward, toward everything I'd built, everything I'd become and everything I still could be.